All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, welcome back.
Today, we're going to be looking at one of the most famous works of philosophy ever written.
Easily top 5.
We're talking about Plato's Republic.
Of course, Republic by Plato, everybody knows the one.
Yeah, and we're going to be looking specifically at chapter 1 of this book.
Yeah, jumping right in.
So, if you haven't read it yet, the Republic is essentially a dialogue written by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato.
Yeah, that's right. And it recounts a conversation that supposedly took place between Socrates and a bunch of his buddies.
Right.
It covers like all sorts of topics like justice and virtue and the meaning of life and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, big questions.
Big questions that keep us coming back.
That's right,
Yeah.
Plato. Now, we spent quite a bit of time with this chapter getting ready for today's deep dive, and we're excited to kind of distill everything down to the most important and interesting points for you today.
Absolutely.
So to kick things off, why don't you set the scene for us? Where are we? What's going on?
All right, so picture this. We're at a party in ancient Athens.
Okay.
Our main man, Socrates, is there, as you might imagine.
Of course.
And the conversation, as it often does at parties, turns to the topic of justice.
Right.
What is justice?
Big question.
Yeah, is it something objective,
Right.
that exists out there in the world, or is it just something that we make up as we go along?
Yeah, like man-made.
Yeah, exactly. So, just casual party conversation.
Yeah, right.
But fortunately for us, there are a few characters there who have some pretty strong opinions on the matter.
Okay, so who do we meet first?
Well, the first guy to step up to the plate is a fellow named Cephalus.
Okay, and who is Cephalus?
Cephalus is kind of like the elder statesman of the group. He's a wealthy and well-respected businessman. He's getting on in years, and he's got this, kind of a world-weary but still pretty optimistic view of things.
Mm-hmm.
So when asked about justice, he gives a pretty straightforward definition. He says justice is simply paying your debts and being honest.
Okay, that seems pretty simple.
Yeah, right on the surface, it sounds pretty reasonable, right?
Yeah.
You owe somebody money, you pay them back.
Yeah.
You make a promise, you keep it.
Yeah.
Don't lie, cheat, or steal.
Like the golden rule, kind of.
Yeah, it's kind of like a golden rule approach, Treat others how you want to be treated.
Right.
Seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, but is that all there is to justice?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
And of course, Socrates isn't just going to let that one slide.
No.
So he starts poking and prodding at Cephalus's definition, looking for weaknesses.
So what kind of counter-arguments does Socrates come up with?
Well, he throws out this hypothetical scenario. Imagine your friend lends you a weapon.
Okay.
But then he goes completely bonkers.
Okay.
Like he becomes a danger to himself and everyone around him.
Mm-hmm.
According to Cephalus's definition, you should still return the weapon.
Right, because it's his and you owe him a debt.
Yeah, exactly. It's his property. You owe him a debt.
Right.
But Socrates is like, hold on a second. Isn't that kind of crazy?
Yeah.
If you know that your friend is going to use that weapon to hurt himself or others,
Yeah.
is it really just to give it back to him?
Right, like, if he's asking for his, assault rifle back and he's clearly not in the right state of mind.
Right, exactly. Cephalus is kind of forced to admit that, well, yeah, maybe there are some exceptions to this rule.
Yeah.
So already we're seeing that this seemingly simple definition of justice isn't quite so simple after all.
Right, so it's more complicated than just following the rules blindly all the time.
Yeah, exactly. You got to use your brain. You got to think about the context. You got to consider the consequences.
So then what happens after Socrates sort of dismantles Cephalus's definition of justice?
Well, Cephalus kind of bows out of the conversation at this point.
Okay.
He's an old guy. He's probably had enough excitement for one day.
He's ready for his knack.
Exactly. So his son, Polemarchus, steps in to kind of pick up the slack.
Okay, so we've got a new contender.
That's right. A new challenger approaches.
Okay, so what does Polemarchus have to say about justice?
Well, Polemarchus, he's a little bit more of a hothead than his dad.
Okay.
A little bit more, ambitious and maybe even a little bit power hungry.
Uh-huh.
So he tries to refine his dad's definition
Okay.
by saying that justice is about helping your friends and harming your enemies.
Okay, so kind of classic eye for an eye.
Yeah, it's very much that kind of tribalistic, in-group, out-group mentality.
Right.
You're loyal to your friends and you're, hostile to your enemies.
Okay, and how does Socrates respond to that definition?
Well, naturally, Socrates has some problems with this definition as well. He's
Yeah.
like, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Is it really ever just to harm anyone,
Right.
even if they're your enemy?
Yeah, because, doesn't that just perpetuate this cycle of violence?
Exactly. Socrates is arguing that harming someone even if they deserve it,
Right.
even if they've done something wrong,
Yeah.
it actually corrupts the person who's doing the harming. It makes them less virtuous. So he's kind of introducing this idea that justice is more about like inner harmony than it is about like outward actions. It's about being a good person rather than just doing the right thing.
Right. So it's more about your character than about your actions.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so Socrates is saying that true justice isn't about revenge or punishment, but about becoming a better person.
Right. And about creating a more harmonious society.
Okay, so how does Polemarchus respond to this?
Well, Polemarchus, he's not entirely convinced.
Oh, yeah.
But he doesn't really have a good comeback.
Right.
So the conversation kind of moves on.
Okay, and who steps in next?
Well, at this point, we get a new character entering the scene, a real firecracker named Thrasymachus.
Okay, and who's this guy?
Well, Thrasymachus is kind of like the resident cynic of the group.
Okay.
He's a sophist,
Okay.
which means he's a professional debater, and he's known for his sharp wit and his kind of ruthless arguments.
Okay, so he's here to stir the pot.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely here to stir the pot.
Okay, so what does Thrasymachus have to say about justice?
Well, he bursts into the conversation, and he's like, you guys are all so naive.
Okay.
Justice, he says, is nothing more than the advantage of the stronger.
Okay, so he's basically saying that might make, right?
Exactly. Yeah. He's arguing that the people in power get to decide what's just and what's not.
Right.
And that's all there is to it.
So it's all about power.
It's all about power.
Okay, and how does Socrates respond to this kind of very cynical take on justice?
Well, Socrates isn't intimidated by Thrasymachus.
Right.
He's not going to let him get away with that kind of oversimplification. So he challenges him on a number of points.
Okay.
First of all, he points out that rulers sometimes make mistakes.
Okay.
They don't always act in their own best interest.
Right.
And sometimes they even act in the interest of the weaker. So if justice is just whatever benefits the stronger, then how do you explain those cases?
Right.
Thrasymachus, he tries to wiggle out of this one. But Socrates doesn't let him off the hook. Right.
And then Socrates goes on to argue that even if a ruler does act in their own best interest, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're acting justly.
Okay.
He says that true justice involves more than just self-interest. It involves considering the well-being of others.
Right.
It involves acting in accordance with some kind of higher moral principle.
Okay, so Socrates is basically saying that even if you have all the power in the world, you still have a moral obligation to use that power for good.
Exactly.
Okay. And how does Thrasymachus respond to that?
Well, Thrasymachus, he gets pretty flustered at this point.
Okay.
He doesn't really have a good response to Socrates' arguments.
Yeah.
But he's not willing to admit defeat.
Right.
So he kind of storms off in a huff.
Yeah, like a child.
Yeah, he's like, I'm out of here.
Right.
You guys are all a bunch of idiots.
Right. Okay, so we end chapter 1 with everybody feeling kind of confused about what justice actually is.
Yeah, pretty much.
Socrates has basically demolished everyone's ideas. Yeah, it's like he's gone through and knocked down all the flimsy structures that people have built up in their own minds about what justice is.
Right.
And he's left them with this kind of empty space
where
they have to start thinking for themselves.
Okay, so where do we go from here?
Well, that's where things start to get really interesting.
Okay.
Because in chapter 2, Socrates decides to take a completely different approach.
Okay, what does he do?
He says, okay, if we want to understand justice, let's try to build a just city from scratch.
Wait, seriously? He's just going to create a whole society in his mind.
Yeah, he's like, let's imagine a city where everything is perfectly just. And let's see what we can learn from that.
Okay, so it's like the thought experiment.
It's a thought experiment.
Okay.
And it's a pretty brilliant one because it allows him to explore all these different aspects of justice in a very systematic way.
Right. Okay, so that's something to look forward to in our next deep dive.
Yeah, definitely tune in for that one because it gets pretty wild.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into chapter 1 of Plato's Republic.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. And you know what? I'm still not even sure what justice is.
We'll join the club.
Right.
That's the beauty of Plato. He asks these big questions.
Yeah.
He gets us thinking, but he doesn't necessarily give us all the answers.
Right.
He leaves us to kind of grapple with these ideas on our own.
Right, and that's what makes it so engaging.
Exactly.
All right, well, for all of you listeners out there who are now totally engrossed in this discussion of justice, we'll be back soon with a deep dive into chapter 2, where things get even more interesting.
Buckle up.
So make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss it.
Yeah, and don't forget to share this episode with your friends.
Yeah, let's spread the love of philosophy.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks for joining us.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.